In 1608, John Smith was the first documented European to explore Prince William County. This is what he may have seen.
Dumfries is a small town in Prince William County, Virginia. The town was chartered on May 11, 1749. This makes Dumfries the oldest continually chartered town in Virginia. There are many historical sites in Dumfries, including the Henderson House and Dumfries Cemetery.
Another historic site is the Ripon Lodge in Woodbridge, built in 1747 by Richard Blackburn. It is known as one of the oldest houses in Prince William County. It has been sold to several people over the years and was eventually sold in 2000 to Prince William County.
Welcome. This is Joy. We are here in historic Occoquan with Mr. Ernie Porta, the mayor of Occoquan, Virginia. Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Mayor.
You're very welcome. Well, we are at 314 Mill Street, which Mill Street is the main street in the town of Occoquan, and we're standing in front of the Occoquan Town Hall. This actually used to be a Methodist church. It was actually one of the earliest churches in town. There was a fire in 1916 that wiped out the other pre-existing church, and a new one was built here on this site in the 1920s. This continued in operation as a church until the 1950s, when the congregation merged with another congregation that's actually now up on G Street, St. Paul's United Methodist Church on G Street in Woodbridge. And then in the 1960s, this was purchased by the town for use as the town hall. Okay, well, first I'll clarify that it's a town, actually, as opposed to a city. So technically, under Virginia law, it's a town. It was actually chartered in 1804, but settlement here was earlier. We actually consider the town to have had its first European settlement around the 1730s. So you will see on our town seal the date 1734, and that's a year actually that the Virginia General Assembly required that a public tobacco warehouse be built on the shores of the Occoquan River. So we use that date as the start of settlement in the area, and that's what you see on the town seal. And then really substantive European settlement started in the 1750s, and then eventually the town was formally chartered in 1804. Okay, I'm in my 7th year, so it's actually my 4th term. It's a 2-year term. I was just reelected this past May. Okay, well, for most of its history, in fact, I would say up until roughly the middle of the 20th century, Occoquan was a river town. So most of the industries in Occoquan were associated with the river. It started out as an iron manufacturing complex, then a milling complex. There also, throughout Occoquan's history, has essentially been a rock quarrying operation taking place on the north bank of the river, and that continues today with Vulcan Materials. At one point, it was a major transshipment point for lumber from the interior. It was also, for roughly 40 years of its history, starting in the 1880s, a major source of river ice, which was taken up to Alexandria, Washington, D.C., and Georgetown. There also used to be 2 shipyards in the town of Occoquan. The Hamill and Underwood families owned those shipyards. And then throughout most of the 20th century, actually roughly up to the middle of the 20th century, I'd say it would be more accurate to say, it was a riverboat excursion destination for people from the Washington, D.C. area. Turned into the Chesapeake Bay made it very, very attractive, because one of the things about iron, as you can imagine, is it's very, very heavy, much easier to transport by water than it is over land. So in addition to that, it was the river that made Occoquan a major transshipment point for lumber from the interior, because the lumber was basically, when it was raw or uncut, was bundled into rafts and towed up to Alexandria, Washington, D.C. or Georgetown. Or if it was sawn or cut in Occoquan's mills, it was loaded on barges and boats and taken to those places. And that basically occurred with all the industries associated with Occoquan. Rock quarrying, the same thing. Rock was actually mined right off the side of the bank there, where now we have trees, but it used to be mined right off the side of the bank and loaded right there, crushed and loaded right there onto barges or boats, and again taken to other locations. So the river has been sort of the main economic engine of the town throughout its history. Today it continues to be so, to the extent that people come down to actually look at the river. One of the things we'd actually like to see over time is reasonable development of the waterfront itself. If you go out on the water now by kayak or stand-up paddleboard or canoe, you will see about roughly half of the waterfront is developed attractively. The other half is not. It basically looks like sort of dead parking lots and things like that. So ultimately, the hope is that over time, Occoquan will continue to be able to expand and use the river as a real draw for folks. Okay, good. The good question. The Occoquan, I like to say, has had three seminal events in its 20th century history that have been important both for Occoquan because it's had to remake itself, and then also for Prince William County because, as you might imagine, Occoquan is one of just a handful of traditional early settlement small towns that remain in the area. Most of the places that you go to today in Prince William County, you will see town centers and the like that people are building. They are artificially constructed places. Occoquan, and there are a few other places in the county, Occoquan is one of those that dates, is one of those towns or areas of settlement that dates from early in the county's history and has continued to exist continuously since that time. So when you hear people talk about our founding or our founders, most of the time you will hear us talk about Nathaniel Ellicott, and that's the person we consider to be the town's true founder. It was Ellicott who dramatically expanded the mill complex. He was one of Ballantyne's successors, several steps removed. It was Ballantyne who expanded the mill complex. He built one of the first bridges across the Occoquan River, roughly where the footbridge is today. He, with two other partners, provided the 33 acres upon which the town was chartered in 1804, and then he also built a toll road that branched off from the main. I'll let that motorcycle go by. But one of the things people are surprised to learn is that there is enough evidence to suggest that humans have inhabited the banks of the Occoquan River for at least the last 13,000 years. There are some 200 plus documented pre-European archaeological sites on the river's north and south banks, just from its mouth at the Potomac to its confluence with Bull Run, so a distance of about 14 miles. So pretty substantial evidence of pre-European inhabitation, pre-European inhabitants. The first European we know to have visited the area was Captain John Smith, who explored the river's mouth at the Potomac during one of his exploratory voyages to the Chesapeake Bay in 1608. As the Dogue or Dog Indians. And it's actually from their language that the word Occoquan is believed to have come. Now, one of the things you'll find out is if you go around and look at our historic markers and our pamphlets and all the traditional historical documentation that we have in Occoquan, or presentation materials that we have in Occoquan, you'll see that tradition holds that Occoquan is thought to have meant at the end of the water in the language of those Native Americans. Now, more recent linguistic analysis, however, from a professor who's a specialist in Algonquin languages, has indicated to us that it's extremely unlikely, in fact, that it meant at the end of the water. And in fact, it's much more likely that it meant a grove of trees. I'm going to stop while he comes by. You are part of a small but growing group of people who now know that it's extremely unlikely, despite what all our expensive historic markers say, that Occoquan means at the end of the water. But in fact, it's much more likely it means a grove of trees and reflected the environmental conditions in the area where Smith had encountered the Native Americans. After Smith, there was not a whole lot of European settlement activity in the area. Down about 2 miles to our east, where the Occoquan River empties into the Potomac, there was significantly more settlement at an earlier stage. The Mason and Carter families actually, in fact, were very prominent toward the river's mouth. Gradually, eventually, settlement moved in this direction, and as I mentioned to you earlier, we consider the first real settlement to be associated with the area that ultimately became the town of Occoquan proper to have occurred in the 1730s. And we say that because we know the Virginia General Assembly in 1734 required that a public tobacco inspection warehouse be built on the north bank of the river, and 2 years later one was built on the south bank of the river. Then in the 1750s, a man named John Ballantyne, with financing from the Taylor family, who had an ironworks down on the Neabsco River, they financed John Ballantyne to establish an iron manufacturing operation here at the falls of the Occoquan.
Yep. I had to stop by and see my friends in the office.
Oh, okay.
I haven't
Claudia
seen them
and
in a
Peggy.
long,
Oh, good.
Yes, I haven't seen them in a long time.
Oh, good.
So you have a nice holiday.
You too. You
Thank
too. Take care.
Welcome. This is Joy. We are here in historic Occoquan with Mr. Ernie Porter. the mayor of Occoquan, Virginia. Thank you for joining us.
Porta. It's really close. That was really good because the shit said right when you said the mayor.